what about you? You are one of the most, I'd written down some questions. This is not one of them, but you're obviously one of the most successful doctors in the world and listen to podcasts. When was the moment where you knew that you could look after some of the most demanding, high achieving people on the planet?
That's tough. I don't, probably the same way that you would say it. It's not entirely clear. I don't think that I don't feel like I've got to some point where yes, I can do this and everything. I think there's a constant sense of, am I doing enough? Am I learning enough? What am I missing? What am I forgetting? What could I be doing better? How can we make this process better? But what I think I can say is it was probably about a year ago that I stopped feeling like an imposter. So that was a big transition, right? That was a big step forward, which is, there was this sort of lingering feeling of, what if you're just nowhere near as good as people think you are?
Right.
And I think I'm over that now, which is,
Only a year ago.
yeah, only a
Only a
year
year
ago,
ago.
to get to the point of, it's okay. Nobody is perfect. Um, and you're not representing yourself to be all knowing. Um, and you're not an imposter.
Was that the drip, drip, drip of achievement, or was there a crystallizing moment?
Yeah, that was a lot of therapy, actually.
Right.
Yeah, that was learned on the couch, not it. So that actually became, that was a big challenge to my identity. I think that was also recognizing like how much of identity is wrapped up in what you do versus who you are. And I think so. Part of it was like kind of releasing my identity being involved in my work,
Wow.
which is an ongoing struggle, right?
How do you remind yourself of that? Do you have a way of
Uh,
reminding yourself?
yeah, I think honestly, like kids are probably the best part of, kids are a great reminder of that, which I know we're going to talk about a lot. But I think a lot of the things I do are, have the potential to warp my head around my identity. So exercise, driving a race car, shooting my bow and arrow, medicine, all of those things have the potential, if I'm not diligent, to consume me in a way that also, sort of determines my self-worth.
Right.
But if I anchor to my eulogy and not my resume, which is sort of my, I think I've shared this with you, but that's kind of like my mission statement in life, is make your eulogy better than your resume. Then I just say, look, these people here, these little people, these kids are the ones that are going to matter at my eulogy. So sometimes I'll come in the house after shooting really poorly, and I'll see my little boys running around, and it's just much easier to now dismiss the thoughts of how frustrating it is that I can't shoot that well today, when I sort of see them playing and realize, well, if I play with them, they don't even know the difference. And I think that's true of medicine as well.
Right. It's so brilliantly articulated. I just need to drill down on, you said, am I doing enough? I completely relate to this. I'm an overworker. The job for me is, what do I really want to achieve and how can I do it with less? Because I think insecurity has led me to overwork. And that, I guess I'm asking you that question, the am I doing enough, which certainly helped get you and I to where we are today, right? Because we probably did work harder than other people. We never stopped, but is clearly not actually not a disciplined recipe for wellness or happiness or being a good husband or a good father, right? Um, how have you made that transition?
Very, very slowly.
Do you worry that you won't be good enough if you don't worry about being good enough?
This is something I've spoken at length with Esther Perel, who's someone you know well and have
Yes.
come to respect greatly. Um,
Yeah.
when I wrote out my recovery contract a year ago, a little over a year ago, um, this was a very important part of that recovery contract, which was, being able to, on a daily basis, journal about the trade off that you describe, which is, if you start to prioritize your eulogy over your resume, you will make deliberate trade-offs that may sacrifice your performance in the short run. And you have to be able to accept that. And you have to be able to write about that in a sort of dialectical way, which is, it is okay to say goodbye to an opportunity today in exchange for something that you value more in the long run. And it's okay to acknowledge that, I think was her point, right? In other words,
Yeah.
don't just sort of shove it under the rug and say, well, I'm going to be much more focused on my family and less focused on my craft, and act like that doesn't matter. No, it's a very deliberate trade-off. And it's okay to
Right.
acknowledge that that's a trade-off. And it's okay to acknowledge that you might pay a price for that in the short run.
So how specific is the journaling? I'm not a journaler. Can you give me an example? If I
Yeah.
was reading it,
I,
what would it look like?
I actually enjoy journaling a lot. I think it's one of my favorite activities that augments my mental health. You and I have spoken about it, but for me, therapy is a very important part of this. I have a number of therapists actually, and I'm involved in, I do sort of regular psychotherapy. I do something called dialectical behavioral therapy, which is something I'm really interested in, and I've become more and more fond of as a tool to help me change behaviors. But in that journal is sort of where a lot of thoughts go in an unprocessed way. And then, in fact, one of the chapters of my book, which you've read, you're one of maybe 6 people who's read it actually, that chapter basically wrote itself because it was simply extractions from the journal. I basically just went back to 2 volumes of my journals and literally just sat down one day. This was actually at Esther's recommendation, and put sticky pads in pages that meant, that sort of took me back through the story. And then the next day, literally just wrote 26,000 words basically into that chapter out of those journals. So I recommend it for a lot of people. I do think that it's a great way to process info, and it's private. I've never shared it with anybody, so no one's read it directly. But it's a place where I can be as honest as I can be anywhere.
It's a great. Can I talk to you about
Yeah.
that chapter? I won't mention. I mean, it was a great privilege to read
You
it.
were the first person to read it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember being incredibly moved by it. It was so articulate and honest, vulnerable, smart, and you could tell it was years of synthesizing everything. And I think the first thing I told you after reading it, it said chapter 15.
Yeah.
I think it was chapter 15.
That's right.
I said, dude, for me, that's got to be chapter 1. I said, because if I'm picking up your book because I want to improve my life, whether it be my longevity, my health, my body, I might think I want to improve my blood pressure results or whatever. But actually, in the end, we all just want to be better humans, right? We want that eulogy to be stronger than our resume. And that was one of the greatest examples of teaching that I ever heard, which came from your ability to go, I've failed here, I've learned this, I've learned that. And I don't think I've ever heard that from a doctor before, to be honest. And it made all the other chapters go, sure. Tell me what to do about blood pressure. Tell me how to train. Tell me how to. I'm in. Because I could see where it was going, and I just, yeah, I can't wait for people to actually read it. Even if they only read that first chapter, you'll get a lot from it.
Yeah, it's so interesting to know how it's going to shake out. Just now that book is being, it's in the process of undergoing a major revision. It's far too long. So that book, when it's submitted, was 180,000 words. It needs to be chopped down by a full third. So, but I've said a couple of things to the editor, and one of them is, I feel strongly about this chapter staying in the book, because there was even some discussion about just discarding that whole chapter, because it's so different from the rest of the book. And as much as I'm afraid to put that chapter out there, because in some levels it's all my mistakes, right? It reflects so poorly. But I also think what you say is true. and what we'll talk about, I think more is true, which is, living long without living well in terms of mental health. It's a form of torture in a way. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Finally, I take conflicts of interest very seriously. For all of my disclosures and the companies I invest in or advise, please visit peteratiamd.com/about, where I keep an up-to-date and active list of such companies.